So you're interested in the backstory and lore of Malifaux and the other games by Weird Miniatures? Well, this is a great place to start. What's up everybody, Jeff here, and this week we're doing something a little different. This is a video that's been a long time coming. Today, we're going to do a summary of the background and history of Malifaux, so you can see how we got to the point where we're at now. If you're new to the channel, this is going to be a great way to set the stage for the other lore guide episodes, because we're going to be talking about everything that happens right up until the point where the narrative of the game books picks up. Now, soon after this video, I'm going to do another episode to go over some of the major story events that take place during the narrative of the game. And then after that, I'm going to do a video on the Tyrants, where we'll go over all the history of the world on the Malifaux side of the breach, as well as who the Tyrants are and what happened to them. And if you're new to Malifaux in general, then after you get some of the basics of the story down by watching this video, I recommend you head over to my buddy Deck's channel, Corner Case, because he recently did a breakdown of everything you need to know to get into the game itself. I'll link that video in the description below. And you can also check out his other videos, as he does a lot of good content related to Malifaux and a bunch of other miniatures games. But for now, let's kick it off by talking about the history of the world from Earthside. Throughout the history of Earth, occasionally mysterious portals would open up, linking this world to another. On many of these occasions, unknown creatures would come through the portal and terrorize the local humans. These stories would get passed on by the people and eventually turn into legend. Sometimes, the creatures who came through the portal were more intelligent, and they would secretly integrate themselves into society, the humans in the area none the wiser. When a portal opened in Abyssinia, no monsters came through, so the Abyssinians decided to investigate. When they went through the portal, they found a cache of soul stones, otherwise innocuous-looking gems, that they found would begin to glow when someone died in their presence. These soul stones could then be used to amplify magical abilities, and this allowed the Abyssinians to develop powerful technologies. But soon, the mages and mystics of the world began to notice that magic's effects were waning. Sorcerers, warlocks, and soothsayers from all across the world joined together to form what became known as the Council, in an effort to figure out why the magic was disappearing and see if they could stop it. The Council soon determines that there is another world connected to their own by a thin veil, and that most of the magic on Earth could be traced back to this other world. They also determine that with enough concentrated force, the veil between these worlds could be pierced, allowing them to travel between the two. After years of preparation and research, they send a call out to all of the magic users of the world to gather in Santa Fe, where they perform a ritual, focusing all of their magical abilities in the same place. After a full day, when the ritual reaches its zenith, most of the mages involved are killed by a powerful burst of energy that creates a shockwave and levels the city. The few mages who survive crawl out of the rubble to find a glistening rift in the fabric of reality that becomes known as the Great Breach. When the survivors head through the portal, they find an abandoned city that looks strangely human, but with an unusual mix of architectural styles and types of buildings. They find a sign at the entrance that has one word written on it, Malifaux, and this becomes the name for the city as well as the world at large. As they continue to explore, they start to find magical relics and artifacts, and soon the members of the Council, who are from disparate backgrounds and have no particular allegiance to each other, begin to splinter into rival groups. Violence begins to break out over who will keep these artifacts, and soon some of the groups are driven out of the city, and some retreat back through the portal. Out of the dominant group, the Council is reborn, and the remaining members begin to hire mercenaries to guard the portal, and scholars and explorers to begin investigating the city and the area around it. All the while, they keep Malifaux a secret from the rest of the world. After noticing that the portal was destabilizing, the mages begin work on a stone plinth in an attempt to keep the portal open. They soon start to hear reports of monsters attacking explorers and a cult that is formed by the other council members who fled to the north. One of the explorers happens upon a small abandoned settlement outside of the city, where he finds a mine, and at the bottom, a cache of soul stones. Remembering the stories coming from Abyssinia about these magical gems, the council decides that it's time to tell the world. After the people of the world get over the initial shock of the revelation, nations start sending envoys and diplomats to gather information about this new discovery. Santa Fe is rebuilt, and the council begins inviting people to settle in Malifaux, and they start mining for soul stones. The work is hard, but it pays well, and the council keeps the biggest stones, but sends the rest back to Earth as a reward for those nations that sent their people to support the settlement. Around the city, settlers noticed piles of scrap metal that seemed to take on a specific form. Some looked like small animals, but others were larger and looked more dangerous. After some experimentation, it was discovered that these constructs could be animated with the power of soul stones. Many of these constructs get sent back through the breach to Earth. As more explorers leave the city, increased reports of attacks from mythological creatures begin to lend credence to the idea that this world is inhabited, but the natives are not friendly. Soon, the humans begin referring to them as the Neverborn. Eventually, someone finds a magical tome that details the dark arts of necromancy, and they begin to raise the undead, who attack settlers in the city. The settlers fight back, and soon, stories of heroic individuals who protect the people from the zombies become famous around the city. Some of the humans who ventured to the north accidentally encounter the tyrant December. He convinces these mages to try to break him out of his cage, and after a great deal of struggling, they are successful. December takes the strongest among them as his proxy, and any in the group who do not bend their knee to the tyrant are consumed by the other members. December then makes his way to the city, where he plans to feed on the energy of the portal to help him ascend. As the humans try to fight him off, the Neverborn Lilith and Nekima arrive with a small contingent of Nephilim and try to help the humans fight off December. The battle is brutal, but the tyrant is powerful, and he uses his magical ability to blow the Nephilim away. As he closes on the portal, a man named Kenshiro appears, wielding the Masamune, a powerful sword containing the essence of another tyrant, and cuts down December's proxy. Kenshiro is killed in the process, and December uses the last bit of his power to throw the sword back through the portal before he retreats back into the mountains. The Neverborn, who up till this point were undecided on whether they should tolerate the humans' presence, conclude that the intruders need to go. Having already helped one of the tyrants escape, they're too dangerous to let roam free, and Nekima and Lilith are soon approached by a witch named Zoraida. Zoraida tells them that she has a plan that will allow her to reseal the breach for 100 years, but she'll need Lilith and Nekima's help. The women reluctantly agree, and Nekima begins slaughtering her way through the city as Zoraida performs her ritual. Just before the ritual is complete, Nekima carves one of the few words she knows in human language on the chest of one of the dead humans, ours, and then tosses the body through the portal just before it closes. When the breach suddenly closes, people all over the world mourn the loss of the humans who were in Malifaux City, all of whom are presumed dead. Earth's supply of soulstones is also cut off, and what was once a sought-after commodity is now also extremely rare. Everyone begins to hoard their supply of the precious gems, and governments begin confiscating them from their people. Ambassadors begin frantically trying to sign treaties to keep the peace, as nations begin looking to their neighbors as the only source of more soulstones. When violence erupts between Bulgaria and their Ottoman occupiers, a series of treaties and alliances drags the rest of Europe into the conflict, and soon after, the world. As the armies clash, what would have been brutal violence is only escalated by the power of soulstone-wielding mages and mechanical constructs. Most of the world gets involved, but the nations of Japan, China, and Vietnam manage to stay out of it, and after a series of political marriages between their monarchs, the three nations decide to unite as the Three Kingdoms. But soon, this powerful new nation starts to see its weakened neighbors as an opportunity to expand its influence and power. They break their treaties and start invading the neighboring nations. This conflict would become known as the Black Powder Wars, and when everything finally settles down, very little has changed, aside from a few minor adjustments in national borders. However, one group was clearly the victor, the Guild of Mercantiliers. When the council had first organized to try to open the breach through to Malifaux, several cabals and secret societies chose not to join them. These organizations planned to try to take control of Malifaux while the breach was open, but the council proved to be too powerful, and they were not able to make their move. When the Black Powder Wars broke out, these organizations began recruiting generals and politicians from the different nations of Earth to their ranks. They used promises of magical knowledge to lure these recruits in, and soon, behind the scenes of the hot war, was a complex conflict of spycraft and sabotage. The cabals began to clash with each other, sometimes being destroyed and sometimes combining into an even more powerful organization. In the middle of the war, one of these cabals is reformed in Eastern Europe, and they use their connections with European banks to finance a massive manufacturing initiative to produce cutting-edge weaponry. They produce rifled weapons, artillery, and ironclad ships, and begin offering to sell them to the nations of the world in exchange for their soulstone stockpiles. Any nation who refused was faced with the threat that their neighbors would be sold these weapons, and as a result, most were forced to do business. When the war finally ended, this group, who came to be known as the Guild, had control of the majority of the world's soulstone supply. They established their seat of power in England and began to seed their people into every nation around the world. Having control over such a large percentage of the soulstone supply, they are able to exert their power over even the most reluctant nations, with the threat of refusing to lend out their soulstones. The Guild soon heavily regulates the trade of soulstones and convinces all the nations of the world to pass laws making it illegal to possess one of the gems without permission of the Guild. After consolidating its power, the Guild spends time stamping out opposition and leads a large coalition army to crush the forces of France, who rose up in rebellion against the Guild under Napoleon. They spend the next few decades stamping out several smaller rebellions and using their political influence to steer the paths of most nations. They attempt to purchase Santa Fe from Mexico, but when its leaders refuse to sell, the Guild sponsors a rebellion which overthrows the government and replaces it with a more Guild-sympathetic one, allowing them to complete the purchase. Soon they start to have problems with India and the Three Kingdoms resisting their power. They send their armies, raised from the various nations, and brutally crush the people of India and begin its occupation. They next turn their sights on the Three Kingdoms, starting an invasion, and then kidnapping its royal family and threatening to kill them. When the leaders of the Three Kingdoms finally concede, the Guild guild has the monarchs and their families killed anyway. After coming to dominate most of the world politically and economically, the guild turns its attention back to trying to reopen the breach to Malifaux. For the better part of the century, they have no luck in this pursuit, until one day, on the 100th anniversary of its closing, the portal just mysteriously reopens. The guild spends a month garrisoning Santa Fe in preparation for an invasion to come through the portal that never comes. After they wait it out, they decide to head through, and they find the city once again abandoned, with no sign of the old settlers, save for one body hanging in a tree. The guild establishes the Resettlement Corps, a group of guild soldiers turned constables that spread out around the city and begin securing it. They start construction on a fortified compound that becomes known as the Guild Enclave, and they appoint Herbert Kitchener as the Governor General to control the city. After establishing their foothold, the guild soon turns their attention to the mining of soulstones and puts out a call across the world for nations to send convict labor to do the mining. It's dangerous work, but no one is particularly concerned for the safety of these prisoners. As settlers begin flooding into the city, the slums start to get crowded, but the guild decides to stop expanding their foothold, having turned their attention elsewhere, and puts up a barricade, calling everything outside of it the quarantine zone, and telling the people that horrors exist in the uncivilized parts of the city, and it's extremely dangerous. A lie that will soon become the truth. When the local Neverborn begin becoming a problem, attacking settlers and guild personnel outside of the city, Governor General Kitchener decides to put a bounty on the creatures and invites anyone to come from Earth to be armed with a shotgun and a badge and become one of his Neverborn hunters. Most of these hunters don't make it a week, but a young woman named Perdita Ortega proves to be very effective at the job, and she uses her earnings to sponsor her entire family to come through the breach and join in her hunts. As necromancers begin popping up around the city and using their undead to attack the people, rumors start spreading that the guild is no longer able to protect the people from this menace. As a result, the Governor General bans the free press and cracks down on anyone publishing a newspaper or broadcasting over the Ethervox. Soon after, his personal staff is attacked by a necromancer, and he is the only one who survives, though just barely. The Governor General decides to found the Death Marshals, putting a blind swordswoman by the name of Lady Justice in charge of hunting down these resurrectionists. The Death Marshals quickly become very popular among the citizens of the city. The guild soon realizes that they have to do something about their citizens who have magical abilities. When crossing the breach, many people who don't have any magical powers find that they are suddenly able to wield magic. When the council was in control of the mines, they didn't care if their workers could use magic, because they were paid employees. However, the guild now employs mostly convict labor, and it becomes a problem when these prisoners are suddenly able to throw fireballs at their overseers. The Governor General hires a woman named Sonia Crid, who has a particular interest in magical abilities, and convinces her to start the witch hunters, with the promise that she'll be able to study any magical relics recovered from the witches. They quickly become very unpopular with the people, as Sonia is ruthless in her hunting of mages, and many of the accused are executed without ever getting a chance to defend themselves. Some of the captured mages are even brought to her Yellow Crypt, where their magical abilities and even their identities are burned away with fire, and they are turned into witchling stalkers. After a while, the guild starts supplementing their convict laborers with hired miners to boost the output of the mines. The abysmal conditions cause these miners to band together and form the United Miners Union, and soon they begin using their dues to hire engineers to find ways to make the mines safer. These engineers, led by Victor Ramos, are soon incorporated into the union, and they reorganize as the Miners and Steamfitters Union. They fight for better wages, safer working conditions, and opportunities for the convicts to work for their freedom. When the president of the union dies, Victor Ramos is a shoo-in as his replacement, but the man is secretly a mage, and he keeps an eye on the witch hunters, as he thinks the guild is just cracking down on mages because they represent a threat to the guild's power. He thinks people should be allowed to use their natural abilities, and he soon forms the Arcanists and starts recruiting from the members of the union who have manifested magical abilities. And that leaves us right where the story of the books picks up. If you're curious for some more detail on any of this, most of this information comes from the core book and supplements for Through the Breach, the Malifaux RPG. But this should have given you a good foundation to watch any of the lore guide episodes focusing on one of the masters. And now you should have a better understanding of how we got to the point where we're at when the story starts. As I said before, if you're curious about what was going on in Malifaux through most of history, keep an eye out for an upcoming video on the Tyrants, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss it when it comes up. If there's anything that came up in this video that you want to hear a little more detail on, drop a comment below, and if there's enough support, I'll do a separate video covering some of those topics. In the meantime, don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.